go, everyone, it's time to figure it out. It's spooky season. Well, also time for more election stuff, but most importantly, spooky season. But that's something we get to take more playfully over at Critic Alley. Like a frog in a jar, playfully bumping against another frog kept in the same jar. Maybe we're all just frogs in a jar. But frogs don't belong in jars. So along with election time comes things that might change some things. Oftentimes, it can be hard to know exactly what you want to vote for, or even what we're voting on. It's hard for a frog in a jar. I find this happens a lot from rhetoric from both sides, murking up a frog water for their own cause. Which many times are just that, their causes, not our causes. At least not mine. As someone who widely stays off of a side in order to stay a free frog not stuffed into a jar. Because I'm on the side of all of us. Between the two wings, I care about the whole bird. I care that we go forward together as a species, not as a political party. 'Cause if one wing destroys the other wing, the bird can't fly. I live in California. California has a pretty big decision on the ballot card. Prop 50. I see a lot of talk for and against it from friends and people in my community alike. And they often seem to say very different things, which tells me maybe they aren't quite sure exactly what's going on. It's one thing to have opinions, but another thing to know what it is you have opinions on. I've met a lot of people who seem to have very strong opinions on things they know nothing about. You know, stuff that's outside the frog jar. You can usually figure this out when you start asking specific questions about that thing that they have opinions on. So let's talk about Prop 50. What it is, why it is, where it comes from, and how it's being used as a conversation topic. I think it's important to learn things about the world around us, especially when they directly affect us. First, let's look at the government website to see what they have to tell us. Prop 50 authorizes temporary changes to congressional district maps in response to Texas's partisan redistricting. It's a legislative constitutional amendment. The summary, put on the ballot by a legislature, requires temporary use of new congressional district maps through 2030. It directs the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission to resume enacting congressional district maps in 2031. Establishes policy supporting nonpartisan redistricting commissions nationwide. The fiscal impact is one-time costs to counties of up to a few $1,000,000 statewide to update election materials to reflect new congressional district maps. So the first thing I noticed is this is a temporary measure, something that is subject to change after the next census around 2030. Also, it's establishing the whole nonpartisan redistricting. And here we find ourselves at the beginning of the rhetoric jargon. This measure is widely considered a response to the Texas redistricting, which is mostly a red state. California is widely a blue state voting-wise. Again, I'm not super into flocking to either side. I'm more interested in equality and what is fair for us to have as citizens. According to a few sources, this is a very odd and quite bold time for them to go ahead and redraw redistricting lines. As I slightly mentioned above, this usually happens after a census so we can get a good feeling of where people live and how we should redraw those voting maps. Which means this, understandably, is done by the people racing to get to power or to stay in that power that they have. Which is why California is looking to do it in response to Texas doing it. It's your classic red versus blue games. So I find that fairness is a difficult thing to accomplish. Almost as if the billionaires care more about maintaining their power than the people that they're supposed to be representing. So I think before we go too much further, we should discuss gerrymandering, the role that it plays in our country, and how it will likely continue to play that role. Starting with the dictionary definition, gerrymandering is manipulation of an electoral constituency's boundaries in order to favor one party or class. By definition, carving out a bias. Like if you give someone a knife to cut a pie, and they want an unfair chunk of that pie, so they cut a very awkward shape out of it. maybe even cut another big chunk out if their best friend wants a big piece of pie too. Then randomly declaring that since they have the most pie, they not only get to decide what this pie is, but they get to also select the next few pies to come. So they can order cherry pie even if we're allergic to cherries. Completely disregarding that we are frogs and we don't even want pie. Unless it's fly pie. Oh, and the biggest kicker? Who do you think is paying for those pies? Us! With our froggy coins! Isn't it odd how often decisions are made by people who don't even care what dessert we want? Nor do they seem to allocate fair pieces of the pie that we paid for. Not a very good group of dinner guests. Croak indeed. These systems may be filled with cracking or packing, which is not like cramming pie in our cracks to pack away for later, like I thought. I just want as much of the tiny piece of pie that I'm allowed to get to bring home for my frog children. Cracking splits disfavored voters among multiple districts. When cracked voters are divided, they often cannot rally enough votes for the candidate or measure that they want. They're stuck in the cracks of the fissures created by the people wielding the giant hammers, or pickaxes, whatever big metal object they have. Packing is the opposite, where they cram all the voters who agree into one district so they can easily sway the vote to the direction they want. For a visual example, imagine a bunch of people in red and blue shirts, and then scooting the people into groups depending on what your favorite color is. But which color do the people prefer more? Well, it turns out that is decided by the people with all the monies who are drawing the maps these days. They get to decide what rules are announced, how they get to be announced, and which way their favorite color should be leaning towards. During which, they can choose to be dishonest about one part to the whole dang thing. This keeps people confused and misled, and it works for either shirt color, oftentimes used by both. That's why I'm here, and many people like myself, to give you information so you can try to decide what color shirt you want to wear and how you want to vote. Who knows, maybe after learning some things, you might want to change your shirt color. Or hell, take your shirt off entirely. Let the mams glam like Christmas hams. Sometimes the districts get cut into weird shapes, like small clouds we get to all take guesses as to what they are. Is that one a dinosaur? Or a teddy bear? Or a pair of big old jugs set on a firm shelf? This isn't a Rorschach, I promise. I won't judge you if you see jugs on the shelf. Other times, districts can be drawn like huge cloud cover, absorbing everything in their mass, disregarding the people who do not get cover, stuck out, baking their pies in the sun. Almost like they don't matter or something silly like that. Maybe it's just me, but I think everyone should count. Maybe just tally all the shirts for a more fair view of things. But what do I know? I'm just an internet comedy jerk, and I won't get to make any decisions unless I become an elected comedy jerk. And strange things have happened in this wild world, so... Anyway, some of you might be wondering why this is the way things are. So it's time for a little bit of history. Just a little bit, I promise. We won't be there long. I know, it's not everyone's favorite subject. The word gerrymander is a portmanteau of the words Jerry and salamander, because in the distant past, it was the salamanders who made rules for the frogs. Dun dun dun. Not sure why frogs let that happen in the first place, but the first time it was used was in the Boston Gazette, March 26, 1812, in Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States. It was in reaction to the redrawing of Massachusetts Senate election districts under Governor Elbridge Gerry. Gerry, who allegedly disapproved of these actions personally, signed a bill that redistricted Massachusetts for the benefit of the Democratic-Republican Party. It was known at the time as the Republican Party and by historians as the Jefferson Republican Party, which was founded by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison in the early 1790s. It championed liberalism, republicanism, individual liberty, equal rights, separation of church and state, freedom of religion, anti-clericalism, emancipation of religious minorities, decentralization, free markets, free trade, and agrarianism. In foreign policy, it was hostile towards Great Britain and in sympathy with the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. And wow, that's a lot of things, isn't it? Some of those foundational ideas almost seem to be on opposing sides of today's stances on those very things, don't they? Almost as if parties changed their mind on certain things as time went on. Maybe that's something else we should discuss later. Anyway, back to lizard man stuff. When they drew the new districts, one of them allegedly resembled the legendary salamander. So not just any belly crawler, but a legendary lizard. Like the Sobe mascot. You remember that cool dude? That's a legendary lizard. Needless to say, the redistricting was a success. Even though Jerry got voted out, the state senate remained firmly Democratic-Republican against the Federalists that had won out the House and governorship. Also, fun fact, it started out with a hard G, making it gerrymandering. And yes, I knew that at the end of writing this, but for the sake of that being a dramatic reveal, I just kept a soft G until then. Going forward, we shall say Gary. The practice continued to be used to this day, often disenfranchising people for not just political party, but for silly things like the color of our skin. Not silly in the ha-ha way, but silly because brown frogs should mean just as much as green frogs. Frog lives matter. So back to the future, we are facing redistricting in Texas and possibly California, pending on the vote. Before we get much further, let's take a look at how they plan to redistrict their maps. Since Texas seems to be a shoo-in, considering it already happened. Spoiler alert. According to professionals, the new lines favored green frogs and red shirts. They even explicitly said as much, disregarding the legal justification from the US DOJ. Normally, they would be more subtle about it and lean on technicalities, but this time, they spray painted green frogs rule all over the billboards. As for California, while it is true that Newsom is trying to add 5 new Democratic seats, I have to give him credit for the fact he's allowing us to vote on this measure, which is a contrast to the way it passed behind closed doors in Texas. We had an independent commission made up of 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 4 independents who drew up the last district maps after the census in 2021, which surprisingly was passed unanimously. I personally get surprised when anything gets passed unanimously in politics. Like, dude, they actually did something fair? Are they really doing their jobs? Wow! Even one of the Democratic members of that group who drew the last map gave their opinions on this redistricting. She basically said that while she isn't fond of gerrymandering because it's inherently unfair, it's a necessary evil to respond to the unfair actions done in Texas. Trying to balance the nation supersedes trying to balance one specific state at this time. Remember, this can and will be redrawn in just a few short years. I think the main problem that many people have is how it's phrased, both audibly and in writing. Frogs rarely enjoy reading, so many of them will hear something and run with it instead of taking the time to research. Many red shirt amphibians tend to vote firmly for their side without looking much into what it is they're voting for. Not to say they aren't smart or anything like that. But, nor am I saying that they're all smart either. I've met many on the red team who go both ways. That's right. Take that as you will. Just as likely, they do. What I'm saying is the red team often has a large amount of trust and faith in their side and the people that are representing them. Trust is usually a good thing when those you trust happen to be trustworthy. Conversely, I have noticed how the blue team has a bit less trust, often showed in how they seem to question a lot more of everything they hear. Both of these qualities are good in different situations. If only they could combine to make some sort of super team. That being said, the blue team is more likely to look things up and be more indecisive at times, while the red team charges ahead like a bull, frog. It's almost as if neither one can get it quite right, huh? I think we need a bit of confidence and a bit of questions in order to make a well-evaluated opinion. So when the pros and cons of this were drawn up, the sides were clearly taken accordingly. As they tend to think more about change and how it can affect their side, the pros were actively supported by the blue team, which heavily play into it being a counter to that measure that Texas took, like I mentioned earlier. As the 5 red seats threaten the balance, the 5 blue seats should counter that. The pros are also reminding you of the promise to return to the Independent Redistricting Commission as promised. They seem to be of the mindset that the shield can go back to being on the shelf when the battle is over. The pros paint this as a fight against election rigging, which it very much does seem to be, considering it came during an unusual time and is widely considered to be a tool to sustain power. The cons seem just as well written to the base that they are trying to reach. They declare it was written by politicians for politicians, which is amusing because that is, in reality, exactly what happened in Texas. So much so that it was voted for by the in-house representatives rather than the people it would actually affect. Salamanders be salamandering, removes requirements to keep local communities together. And what? That seems to be a little bit of a stretch since it's not forcing anyone to move or displacing them from their homes or families like some other measures and demands are already actively doing. In fact, there are quite a few districts that remain completely untouched by this maneuver, which is neat because sure, it's changing things, but they're temporary changes and they're not super dramatic. Moving forward, it also claims it eliminates voter protections that ban maps designed to favor political parties, which again seems derisive and exaggerated, which when, again, we are allowed to vote on it. So how is it eliminating voter protection when voters are allowed to make the decision for it? Also, banning maps designed to favor political parties? It literally says we will go back to the old map when the perceived threat is over. And yes, I know, I split that sentence up, but I felt that both sides should be examined. But even if we push them back together, I'm pretty sure the points I made still stand. Nothing is being banned and our power is hardly being limited, if at all. All our votes will still happen and should be counted, right? Unless you start factoring in the Electoral College, which is another institution that I will likely scrutinize at length later on. I got my froggy eyes on you, and I'll rip it apart later. The cons end on telling you to vote no to protect fair elections and keep citizens, not politicians, in charge of redistricting. But isn't this an attempt to keep the elections fair when they were brought into discord by what Texas just did in an attempt to make the elections unfair? It is, after all, a countermeasure, which was designed and enacted by politicians because, again, Texas didn't let anybody vote on that. So it sounds like the politicians deciding the politicians' way already happened, and this is our ability to vote on what we, the citizens, want to happen next. Because lastly, aren't the citizens voting on the redistricting right now with this very proposition? That means it's being put in the hands of the voters quite literally instead of being decided behind closed doors. That's why we are voting on it. So the citizens could decide temporary redistricting. Keyword being temporary. The reason I went so much harder on the cons than the pros is because I found so much more incorrectly expressed rhetoric there. Scary words and opinions meant to scare you. Things that imply that politicians are trying to take your power and ban you from having it by giving you the power to vote on it with the promise to revert back and the ability for us to change all of it next time we have a census, like the original rules demanded. Can you see why I might find problem with the way it was said? It's like someone handing you a piece of paper for you to order your sandwich on, while someone else in your ear is yelling at you that you don't actually get to choose your sandwich with that piece of paper. Even though that's the whole point of the paper. I don't even want a sandwich anymore, just stop yelling at me. As a reminder, I'm not happy with any of this Gary the Salamander stuff. Nor am I telling you how to vote, cause that's up to you. I'm simply trying to wave away the magic fart cloud used to get you to be afraid of losing things that aren't actually in danger at all. I want you to be more informed so that you can make a better decision instead of taking rhetoric at face value. Because biased words make biased feelings. You are free to vote how you will, and being free to vote on it just backs up what I'm saying. There will always be things that we're not given any say in, and those are usually decided behind closed doors, or by lobbyists with the almighty dollar. But this is a decision you can make. In fact, it's a decision that many of you have already made. And I was fully aware of that when I started writing this. My whole goal with this episode, hell, my whole goal of this channel is to supply you with information and empower you to make decisions for yourself. I just want them to be your decisions empowered with you being informed so that you can make the decision that you actually want to make, not the decisions that you're told you want to make. And to go forward doing just that. Because if I wanted to control you, I would have used completely different phrasing. Or just decide things behind closed doors. No, I'm not going to let that go. To be honest, it really irked me that decisions like that were made in a way that the people it affected couldn't even decide their fate. I'm a big fan of choose your own adventure books, especially when it's not a book, it's your life. I strongly believe that America should be home of the free the way it was intended to be. Before I go, I feel it is very important to remind us that it is crucial that we never give up hope. Regardless of what direction we start going. We will be better off and we will be stronger if we work together. While everyone is perfectly entitled to have their opinions and feelings, it is very important to remember that we need to do what is best for us as a species and not eat our feces. Remember, there is more to the world outside than just your pond. Sometimes other ponds will get compromised and displace the frogs that live there. Maybe some of those frogs will move into your pond. It would be fantastic for them if you could welcome them. They would very likely have something to offer the pond. At the end of the day, we're all frogs, just trying to be free, munch flies, and stay the hell out of jars. Don't let the salamanders win. See you next time. We gotta figure it out.